My name is Andrew Stewart from Chipping Norton. I've grown up in Chipping Norton, born in Liverpool Hospital, very close on the other side of the river. We always look at Chipping Norton a little bit like an island. The river wraps around in a sense, and you've got Liverpool, Warwick Farm on one side, then other side you've got Georges Hall, Landsvale. We tend to look at Chipping Norton right smack in the middle, and we use the river in many ways over our years to sort of access the other side and meet up with different people. It's always been a bit of an adventurous area, especially growing up from the very young years. We like to climb trees, go swimming. Even though we had our own trees and pools and things at home, the river was just a much broader area to explore and find out what's on the other side of the river or what's in the river. There's a lot of bushland. You have a lot of experiences with trees, animals, power craft on the water, as well as sort of manual craft like kayaks and canoes. You can fish from the river, you can fish in the river, in boats, and you sort of form a lot of bonds with different people. You'll have your lifelong friends that we've grown up with, live in the same street. It's just down the road, so we're always sort of allowed to run free rein across the road in the park and use the river as well. Some of the things we used to get up to as kids would be sort of digging cubbies or using just the natural forms of the landscape and the sort of surrounding trees and, I guess, lantana, and we used to call it cane, and make cane cubbies so you could sort of chop out the insides of it and it'd still hold its shape, and we could hide out there and do what little kids do. And occasionally when you get a bit older and you might experiment with a bit of fire or things like that, and we start to camp down the river. Occasionally we go night fishing as well, and you might have a fire on the beach, and that might attract someone from the other side of the river to come over and have a bit of a conversation. You'll also find that there's a lot of people who use the river to fish for their daily catch. They might actually be surviving off the river a little bit. And I remember as a young kid there was a couple of gentlemen, and they were from Laos, and they used to teach us their fishing technique, and that's sort of worked well over the years. The way to tie your knots and the length to have your sinker and your swivel and a few things like that, and just the sticks that you could use just to sit back and you let the stick hold your rod and just watch the tip go, and you sort of let the fish take it before you rip it up and wind it in. In terms of sort of animals and things that we used to see down the river, bearded dragons, things like that, we used to catch them by getting a towel, and you try and spring up on them and throw the towel over the top and catch them. Didn't really do much with them other than take them home and try and feed flies to them and things like that, but most of the time they got away. And we'd think we tried to put a few fish in the swimming pool and things like that, but they didn't quite like the chlorine. At the bridge at Chipping Norton, there was a lot of sort of fun that came out of there as well. We found that if you went through the night with a torch, the birds just for some reason would fly directly at the torch, and we ended up with a basket full of birds one night, and I'm sure they had lice and other things, so we had to get rid of them pretty quick once Mum found out about them. Snakes are been another sort of funny thing that you find down there, snakes, blue tongues, things like that, but really we didn't see many other types of snakes other than red bellies. And there's been times when I've almost picked one up thinking it's a bike tyre or things like that, or you go along in the boats and you can see them. They like to have their head and tail in the hole and hang out their body and just catch the sun on the bank of the river. But fortunately, no one ever got bitten. They seem to be more scared of us and run away. Even spiders, there's been a few big spiders, but not quite knowing what type they are. I think they were just too big to be dangerous. But there's a lot more dangerous spiders, I think, around home at the moment with redbacks and things like that. The types of fish that we used to catch, we used to get perch, bream, flathead. They were the main types. A lot of eels as well. Occasionally, people used to bring some fish from out at Botany and then drop them in the river, so you might get an odd catch of a fish that shouldn't be there. My brother was just talking about the river being clear. I can't ever remember the water being crystal clear, other than once you get up past sort of the fresh water and start to get into the salt water, then the water really clears up and you notice a difference. At Warwick Farm there is a sewer treatment plant, and from what I always heard, they used to pump raw sewage out of that treatment plant into the river, which I'm not sure if it's true or not, but whether that relates to any sort of health issues for anyone that swims in the river, I don't know. But as we grew up, the river took on a different shape. It was really just a river that sort of meandered around, and then as we were growing up, they dredged a lot of the sand out for sand mining and sort of selling it off, and that really took out a lot of layer off the bottom of the river. So we noticed that there wasn't anything good to walk on. We could go up to it probably our knees trying to walk through this muddy sludge. And this is down right off the end of the beach at Chipping Norton, where they brought in fake sand. And that sand used to get graded for a little while with a tractor, but after about 5 years, the trees took over and now it's just a bit of a pine forest. But from that point out further, you'd have a bit of trouble trying to push the boats out and stuff. Sometimes your legs would be going sort of trying to get out of the muddy sand. And sort of opposite that, in the same bay at Chipping Norton there was a little island for a while, which probably, I think, fell over. It had some tall trees on it, but we used to call it Bird Island. All the birds used to just sit there all day and poop. Yeah, they eventually it just got too heavy, and I think in one of the floods that island just blew over. So from having no islands, they dredged a lot of the shape out and probably created maybe 10 islands at one point. Some of them just sort of collapsed, and other ones are still there today. There's one in particular which I've only recently found out. It's called Bulgagong Wildlife Reserve, but it's got its own hidden bay in the island, so you can drive your boat sort of in and then come back around and tuck your boat there. So we had a couple of nights camping on that island, fishing, and have a bit of a campfire and cook up our food and things like that. So that was a bit of fun. And people would rarely know that you were there. The floods were probably another major influence on the river. It was good to grow up. I'd say in the last 86, I think, was the last big flood. So it's quite a while ago now. But as we were growing up, we've experienced 2 to 3 really good floods that were up to the soccer posts at South Park, and just the destruction that it causes, but also the things that change. While the flood's on, is a very different sort of feel to once it subsides and you see the aftermath and all the sort of distraught little bugs, and you've got crabs that are swaying on little reeds out of their homes while the flood's going, and then after the flood goes, you notice all the they're called squirt worms that we use for bait. They sort of go white. From a red colour, they go white. They just sort of petrify. They've all been sucked out of their holes and just get left on top of different areas once the water subsides. In regards to using the water as such of the river, we probably started off with rope swings. We used to climb trees and put up ropes and sort of swing out to the water, or there would be certain branches that were good enough and hang out far enough over the river to jump off. And we never really had any injuries, which is surprising, but it's usually fairly deep in the river. But some of those trees you would have to change probably every 2 or 3 years, because the trees that were closest to the river would occasionally, their foundation would go underneath them and they'd fall into the river. So you'd have to sort of find a new spot every now and then. Sometimes the easiest way to get to that tree was to actually swim across the river to get there first and then set up your little camp over there. We also used things like the Chipping Norton Bridge, the older one it's still there next to the new one now. And I remember one night following the older boys, my older brother and his mates, and it was my first time jumping off the bridge, and at night time as well. So I ended up doing a bit of a backbuster, and one of my brother's mates had to sort of swim out and drag me back in. I wasn't moving too well after that, but it was really just a bit of a slap on the back, that one, and it's all a bit of fun. But we then, as we grew up, we got into power boats. We call them tinnies, just sort of 11 to 12 foot aluminium runabouts. And you'd range anywhere from a 5 horsepower motor up to generally about 15 or 25 was average, but you would get people putting 40 horsepower motors on these things, and they were just a bit of a weapon. The way that they'd cut the keel off the bottom of the boat and they'd just slide around side to side, but anywhere from 12, maybe to 15 horsepower was enough to get someone up on the back on skis or a wakeboard or a knee board. So we had a lot of fun with those on the river. Also, probably a bit of swamping. You'd get the boat and you'd really give it a hard tilt on the engine just to get one side to dig in, and it would throw out a big wave, a big swamp. So you'd sort of go along and wet different things. Occasionally you might get another boat and they'd get a bit upset. And there was a time when we went a bit too far and there was 3 of us in the boat. The one in the middle fell out and knocked the driver out on his way through. So I was the only one left in the boat sort of hanging upside down, which I don't know how, but it did come back, and I managed to cut the motor out before the other 2 got run over. So it was a bit of an experience that day. There's a lot of things that probably could have gone a lot worse than they did, but thankfully everything came out well. I guess we used to explore on the other side, things you don't probably see anymore. They used to swim horses in the river as part of the training. I don't know if they're not allowed to do it anymore, but it's something that I haven't seen for years. They'd be out 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning and you could see the horse's breath and hear them swimming in the river. But we used to venture across to the race course before. It wasn't a very secure place, or you just could go across the river or swim across or get up there, and we'd use the race towers that they have for sort of watching the horses. We'd climb up there to sort of view the landscape and see around the area as well. And on the opposite side of Government Quarry Drive from the racecourse, we used to call it Old Geezer's house. We used to sort of look at it as you've got to steer clear of there's someone who's going to chase you out of his property or something like that. But they still use it for training the horses today, where they're currently thinking of developing it. It's called Cooper's Paddock. And there's a section in there next to or it could even be part of the water treatment plant. But I remember we went in there once and decided to have a bit of a swim, and the pond was just full of frogs and tadpoles, and starting to think about that recently. I just wonder how many snakes were probably eating those tadpoles and frogs, but they probably had enough food not to worry about us. Yes, well, I think that's about it for me. Thank you for listening to my stories. If I come up with any more, I'll let you know.